We turn now to the U.S., where the head of the Federal Communications Commission, which oversees U.S. media outlets, has warned that some broadcasters risk losing their licenses over their news coverage of the Iran war. Brendan Carr, a Trump appointee, wrote in a social media post that broadcasters must operate in the public interest, and those that are running hoaxes and fake news have the chance now to correct course before their license renewals come up. This follows an outburst by President Trump, who slammed critical headlines about the war. Free speech groups blasted Carr's warning, calling it outrageous.
There are ways that you can do content that wouldn't cut it under the organic statute that set up the FCC. But this guy from day one is all in on the Trump plan of everybody praise maximum leader or you're in trouble. And the or inherently involves the unconstitutional use of legal tools given to the FCC from Congress, and to follow Congress's lead invariably involves efforts to corrupt those, to control the message and make it pro-Trump. Just down the middle violation of the First Amendment, down the middle illustration of what doesn't happen in democracy.
It's clearly a manufactured story to try to distract from what was a questionable civilian decision-making to launch this war in the first place. Okay? Over the last 72 hours, the chairman of the FCC, Brendan Carr, has essentially declared regulatory war on the broadcast press. He wants to eradicate freedom of the press completely. Carr's invoking a long-standing legal concept known as the public interest standard. Broadcast stations operate on public airwaves. It's the affiliates that technically operate on the broadcast airwaves, not the overall networks themselves. NBC doesn't have the license. Its affiliates have the license. Okay? So the law does require them to, quote, serve the public interest. So what's the public interest? Freedom of expression, freedom of the press. It's all in the First Amendment. I think it's pretty easy. We know what the public interest is. But Carr now is trying to reinterpret that standard through a political lens. So on Saturday, he posted that broadcasters running what he called, quote, hoaxes and news distortions, what he labeled fake news, have a great chance to, quote, correct course before their license renewals come up. Interesting. Then in a CBS interview, he went further. He said broadcast licenses are not a property right. They are a privilege. He said broadcasters have grown too comfortable assuming the government cannot take those licenses away. And he suggested that the FCC must enforce patriotic standards of truth in wartime. Wow. Patriotic standards.
To all units, proceed to your post assignments. All units, proceed to your post assignments.
That's the sound of the police. Whoop, whoop. That's the sound of the beast.
Yeah, baby. It's episode 23 of Probable Cause on March 17th, 2026. St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. This is Jeff Norman, along with the FBI whistleblower himself, Greg Dillon, as we always are on Tuesday nights. And tonight, we're very pleased to have Eugene Volokh join us. He is a constitutional law expert who taught at UCLA for 30 years, and he's now a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. He's also the founder and editor of the Volokh Conspiracy, a great blog featuring various law professors, and he is the host of Free Speech Unmuted. Good evening, Eugene and Greg. How are you gentlemen tonight?
Very good.
Doing well, thanks.
Good. Happy St. Patrick's Day. So I hope that you can help us figure out how much of this is a real concern, because I sense a little hair on fire hyperbole, maybe even a lot of it, kind of like a boy who cried wolf syndrome. At least that's my impression, and I can't wait to get a little reality check from you, Professor, because maybe I'm mistaken. What I'm getting at is I don't think that Brendan Carr, in this particular situation that we're talking about, this tweet that he put out that everybody has been reacting to for the last few days, I don't think he committed any kind of a First Amendment violation simply by saying he might exercise authority that the FCC actually has. I get that people are concerned about how he might enforce it or how the agency might enforce it, but there's a difference between worrying about a First Amendment violation that hasn't yet occurred and claiming one has already occurred. Is this making any sense to you, Professor?
Well, yes, and I see your point. At the same time, when government officials, especially ones in charge of regulatory agencies, talk, people listen, and they may pay attention. And the goal of the public officials speaking may, in fact, be that people will change what they say and change what they do to go along with the implicit demands, or sometimes the explicit demands. So I think people are quite right to worry about what the FCC chair is saying with regard to what the FCC might do with regard to broadcaster licenses. Is his statement itself a First Amendment violation? Probably not, although sometimes threats of retaliation are themselves First Amendment violations. But it's certainly something that I think people who care about free speech ought to care about. Just like if a police chief gets up and says, if people say unpatriotic things, there are all sorts of things we as the police could do about that. Is that a First Amendment violation? Well, certainly if they arrest you for saying something that they think is unpatriotic, or arrest you on some pretext, but the real reason is because of their speech, well, then that would be a First Amendment violation. But it may very well be that the threat itself may violate the First Amendment as well. And even if it doesn't, at the very least, it is a threat to free speech.
Well, it doesn't depend what exactly he's threatening. What I'm contending, and maybe I'm wrong, is that he's only threatening to exercise authority that the FCC actually has. He didn't say that there has to be favorable news coverage about anything. He's just talking about there's a news distortion policy. Now, to be fair to him, though, he also linked to Trump complaining about war coverage. So, yes, I can see where people would make that association and worry about it. But even if we connect it to war coverage, he didn't say that the war coverage has to be favorable. He says it has to be accurate. So he's threatening people with some sort of punishment if they violate the news distortion policy.
So let's just step back a bit and figure out what the First Amendment rules here are. Turns out they're not as clear as one might think. So when it comes to most media, podcasts, which are distributed on the internet, newspapers, whether distributed on paper or on the internet, the government has no power to punish the speaker or to take away the speaker's license. You don't need a license, right? For supposed news distortions. Now, certain kinds of falsehoods can be punished. Classic example, defamation. False statements of fact about a person that damage the person's reputation. And sometimes said with knowledge that they're false, sometimes it's enough to show negligence. There is a First Amendment exception for that. There's a First Amendment exception for fraud in the sense of, say, financial fundraising that is based on falsehoods. But you can't get kicked off the internet by the government because you are saying things that supposedly distort the news. Now, what about broadcasting? The Supreme Court has said that over-the-air radio and television broadcasting is subject to greater restrictions. So the two classic examples, there's a 7 dirty words case, which says that the FCC v. Pacifica from the late 1970s, which says that vulgarities, that if you air vulgarities on the not on the internet, on broadcasting, over the broadcasting, or nudity, FCC v. Pacifica didn't talk about it, but it's the same policy, you could have your license revoked as a result. And of course, in other media, that's protected unless it's highly pornographic. And the FCC standard for broadcasting is much more restrictive than what may be present in other media. So that is one difference. Another difference is that that the so-called fairness doctrine, which required broadcasters to air rival views if they they promote one view on a contested issue, they have to make time available for other views, that's also constitutionally permissible. And the court has also held that in general, the licensing of broadcasters by the government is permissible. At the same time, the court has made clear that that cannot be a basis for the government to try to censor speech. It can't censor speech based on viewpoint, and certainly the court has never generally upheld a right of broadcasters to, a right of the government to take away a license because of news distortion. One concern is, even though facially news distortion is a viewpoint neutral standard, in practice, it's very likely that it's going to be applied differently to different views. So the Supreme Court has never quite upheld, or has never upheld that standard, never been asked to really fully consider that standard. So it may very well be that even though it is in FCC policy, news distortion is, that it will be, in fact, seen as a First Amendment violation.
Right. There's the policy right there. Yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable with the whole notion of the government deciding what is or isn't truthful, apart from defamation, which I guess is the only other example I can think of. But what you're saying is it might not be constitutional, but I think that's different than saying Carr is out of line for referring to it. I mean, it does exist right now,
So it does, although, as we know kind of an American law with its common law tradition, but I think it's probably a feature of most legal systems. What the rules are, what they actually are, especially if they're relatively vague, often in practice can't be understood without understanding the traditions of how the rules have been applied. In part because sometimes a rule that would be clearly invalid if interpreted really broadly has survived in part because it's been interpreted quite narrowly. Right. So in general, the FCC has been quite reluctant to apply the news distortion standard. I believe it may have been applied only once since the early 1980s. And it is in part the very fact that the FCC does not try to use it as a cudgel against broadcasters, and invokes it very, very rarely, that has made it potentially permissible. So what it sounds like Carr is saying is, we're going to reinvigorate it. We're going to read it really quite maximally, or at least quite broadly, as opposed to the way that we had been over the last 50 years.
Professor, I had a question.
Let's say for the last 40 years. Yeah.
I know you were talking about news distortion, but when you were referencing the fair time issue, yes. My understanding, and this is out of my lane, but my understanding is this is applicable only to TV, like broadcast, like non-cable, not internet.
Over-the-air radio and television broadcasting.
So I was looking into it before we went on the air, and I found an article that said the Media Research Center reviewed ABC, NBC, and CBS, which would fall into this particular category, the coverage of the first 4 months of Donald Trump's presidency, and found that 92% of the coverage was negative, 8% was positive. And they contrasted that with the first 4 months of President Biden's term, and they found that 59%, so almost 60% was positive, 41% was negative. So they pointed out there was a 102-point variance between the two presidents over the first 4 months of their first term. So would that not trigger the argument that it is not fairly being reported? I mean, is there something to that?
So first, I tend to agree that the broadcast networks have in recent decades been biased, and been biased mostly towards the left. The Fox News, I think, has been biased somewhat to the right, but generally speaking, it's
but they're on cable.
Exactly, it's a cable system.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the broadcasters, they have been. So I don't want to argue about that. But with regard to fairness doctrine, the Supreme Court upheld it in 1969, but the FCC repealed it in 1987. Actually repealed it on First Amendment grounds. said in light of changes in the marketplace, in light of the advent of cable and other such things, really the basis for treating broadcasting so sharply differently from cable, from newspapers and such, from magazines, which historically, of course, have been quite opinionated, is no longer there. So that was actually a project of the Reagan era FCC. It was generally conservatives who said, FCC, the fairness doctrine is not a good idea. It deters coverage of controversial issues because it's like equal time obligations, not quite equal time, but fair time obligations are like a tax on controversial messaging. If you say something uncontroversial, then you don't have to give up any of your time. But if you express a view on a controversial subject, then in that case, you would have to give up your time. The consequence will be that people would be discouraged from presenting controversial views. That's not a good idea. FCC took that view in repealing the fairness doctrine. So the reason it's not a fairness doctrine violation, which you described, is there is no fairness doctrine today. The Supreme Court had said in 1969 that it's constitutionally permissible, but it's surely not constitutionally mandatory, and the FCC ended up repealing it. By the way, there were attempts to reenact it. President Reagan vetoed it, and again, by and large, it has been a conservative message that we don't need a fairness doctrine. The market is better here than the government. It has been mostly in recent decades a liberal thing to try to, and progressive thing to try to reinstitute the fairness doctrine. Now it seems like, as with so much in life, it seems that things have flipped.
I think Greg was conflating the fairness doctrine with the equal time rule, and I think a lot of people do. So let me take a little stab at it, and then I'll turn it over to you, Eugene.
Sure.
The equal time rule refers only, I believe, to political candidates.
Yep.
Yes.
And the fairness doctrine is, as he just described, and it's no longer in effect. But the equal time rule, that is still on the books? Is that a law, or is that a policy of the FCC?
Okay. So unlike the fairness doctrine, which was an FCC policy, FCC created it. FCC was entitled to repeal it. The equal time rule is a federal statute. It is provided in Title 47 of the U.S. Code, Section 315. And it does, as you point out, apply to legally qualified candidates for public office. So it only applies during election campaigns. It only applies when there's time given to a candidate. And by statute, it specifically exempts bona fide newscasts, bona fide news interviews, bona fide news documentaries, at least generally speaking. So as a result, it's something that wouldn't apply for various reasons to coverage, positive or negative, of President Trump. He's not a candidate now, and the coverage is generally speaking on newscasts and news interviews.
Right. Now, as far as the exemptions, I think that's one of the controversies regarding Carr, is how to interpret it and who gets exempt. I believe he was trying to when I say trying, I don't even know exactly what has to be done to change it. But I think there was some kind of an issue about redefining the daytime and late night talk shows as not exempt anymore. Is that correct?
Right. So again, step back. 47 U.S.C. 315, special statute, only applies to broadcasting, again, because for newspapers, very similar statute, I oversimplify here, but a similar statute was struck down unanimously by the Supreme Court in 1974, saying, well, that would be an interference with the editorial discretion of newspapers. Well, but for broadcasting, it may very well be that this statute is permissible. Among other things, note it's a fairly narrow statute. It only applies to political candidates. It's also fairly well defined. It's not, you can't distort the news, whatever that means. It's, if you provide time, you have to provide equal time to other candidates. But it does have these exceptions for bona fide newscasts and news interviews. Then the question arises, what counts as a newscast or news interview? Is a late night talk show, which is in part kind of a comedy talk show, is that a bona fide newscast news interview? In the early 2000s, in a case I believe involving Jay Leno and Arnold Schwarzenegger, who at the time was a candidate for California governor. The FCC said, "Oh well, that's under the particular facts of that case. That is not. That is a bona fide newscast. That is not does not trigger equal time coverage." But it was in part because of the theory that, this was a news, that because Schwarzenegger was nationally famous, it was a newsworthy topic even apart from his candidacy. So it was actually quite peculiar to the facts of that case. But there are other cases that also extended this to other things that weren't the traditional nightly newscast. So generally speaking, let's say the FCC for a while had also read the equal time rule narrowly by reading the bona fide newscast exception broadly, and now Brendan Carr has been talking about shifting back to a narrower reading where a newscast might be more, again, like the nightly news or something that we would identify as a straight up news program.
Does he have to get the other FCC commissioners on board?
Oh yes, absolutely. He's of course influential. He is a vote there, and presumably he is something of a leader there, at least of his side. But yes, he can't do this on his own. This would happen.
Here's one of the other commissioners tweeting back at him in regard to this most recent threat. And she says the FCC can issue threats all day long, but it is powerless to carry them out. Such threats violate the First Amendment and will go nowhere.
So
what should we make of that?
So there are two things to keep in mind. One is it's powerless. The reason she's saying it's powerless is it sounds like she's saying that courts will stop them. That if the FCC tries to pull somebody's license or not renew somebody's license, there'll be a court challenge and the courts will come out in favor of free speech protection and against the FCC's position. It's possible. It's certainly possible. It's also a little risky at times, right? As if this is your business on the line, you might not feel completely certain, especially since again the precedents are somewhat uncertain here. The other thing, of course, is that threats often work even without them carrying them out, right? Somebody comes up in your dark alley and says your money or your life, right? That's a robbery, even if he never actually pulls out the gun. In fact, even if it turns out he never would have pulled out the gun, he didn't have a gun. He's just trying to
bluff.
Pardon?
Bluff.
Yeah, he's bluffing, but he's just trying to threaten to threaten you. That may very well be successful. So that's the worry, especially when you.
So she's trying to counter that possibility, is what it looks like.
She is, and I think she may ultimately be right. That ultimately, at least many situations that we've been talking about, courts would say, no, this is not a valid thing for FCC to do. But part of the danger of what Chairman Carr, Chairman Carr, has been doing is that people might say, I'm not willing to bet the company. I'm not willing to bet hundreds of millions of dollars if that's the value as a practical matter of my broadcast license. Maybe I'm not even willing to spend the hundreds of thousands of dollars or maybe millions of dollars litigating this because it's expensive. Lawyers are expensive.
Wow, I don't know why it's so expensive. That seems to be like the kind of thing that Fire or the ACLU should just take on. It's like
so they might. They're very busy at Fire, and by the way, I work closely with Fire. I've at times consulted for Fire. I've worked with ACLU as well. I respect their work. They're very busy. Unsurprisingly, they usually try to represent people who they think otherwise wouldn't have the money to be represented.
Oh, okay.
If you are a multi-million-dollar business, I think they will probably see it is a cost of doing business. Yeah. And I think many companies would understand it's a cost of doing business. The problem is sometimes they say, look, even if we could afford it, even if we think we'll ultimately win, money is tight these days. Let's just play it safe. That's the worry.
This is not day one. Carr has been at it for a while. So why don't we just take a look at what sort of a chilling effect, what the evidence is of a chilling effect so far. I know that Jimmy Kimmel show was pulled off for, I think, 3 days or something like that when the broadcast stations that carry him said they wouldn't carry him for
Right.
some period of time. And I guess we could assume that was because of what Trump was threatening,
Hard
but
to
it's
know
not
for
definite.
sure.
Yeah.
Or hard to know for sure if it was because of Cart's threat. It could have been because of public pressure. It could have been because the owners of the stations were upset with Kimmel because they were worried about public pressure, or just for their own reasons. It's hard in any particular case to really draw the through line and say, okay, there's proof that this is the real reason, especially since a lot of, as a business matter, in a lot of these situations, you don't want to kind of publicly explain the actual reasons for what's going on. You may not want to even sue over it. And, Kimmel didn't sue anybody because he's got ongoing business relationships. So the facts may not come out. Also, the worry is that it isn't just something that will cause somebody to go off the air. It's something that will cause someone who wants to stay on the air to avoid certain subjects, to avoid something that might draw the FCC's attention. There is a famous line from Justice Thurgood Marshall about the sword of Damocles. Of course, that's the famous story about the hanging sword over the head of the king. And the king supposedly told the story sort of to show how hard it is to be a king, because there's always this peril. But Marshall's line was, the sword of Damocles is effective not because it falls, but because it hangs.
Right.
It's very presence, even if it doesn't actually fall. You can't count its effectiveness by counting the number of times it's fallen.
So that's a good point, that we don't necessarily know what the chilling effect is. But aside from that reality, which is acknowledged, have you detected any signs of the chilling effect?
So I think the answer is it's probably not vast. I think in part because broadcasters generally do have money, and they are willing to. They have lawyers who probably give them good advice on this, and I think they're probably realize that the law is in some measure on their side, even if not completely certainly. I think also a lot of broadcasters get kind of positive reinforcement, both from viewers and from others in their social circle, from standing up to the government, as they should in such situations. So I doubt the chilling effect is vast. My sense is that there's probably there to some extent. And that,
I think there's actually evidence to the contrary. If you look at how Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert slammed Trump viciously every single night, they don't seem too scared.
Right. It doesn't have an effect on them. The question is whether it has effect on others. Probably has effect in some measure. But I will say, I do think that as to the equal time rules for the candidates, I do think that has an effect just because the rule is so clear. It is authorized by Congress. It's not just some rogue thing that you could say, well, Brendan Carr is coming up with something on his own. It is true, again, that Carr is reading it more broadly than it had been in the past, but not implausibly broadly. It's not implausible to say, bona fide newscast, Congress had in mind something other than basically a comedy program, which happens to cover news at times. So in any event, I do think there's some effect, but I agree that we shouldn't overstate it. We should say, oh my God, nobody can say anything criticizing the president. Of course, they're criticizing the president all the time, often quite justifiably, sometimes not.
Well, before we say goodnight with you, there's one other thing I want to ask you, because it's another thing that's on the books now. I don't know how significant it is or how it should be interpreted, but broadcast licensees are required to serve the public interest.
Right.
And so what is that phrase, public interest? What does it mean, and who decides it, and what happens if there's a dispute about it?
Right. So that's a great question. And we don't know for sure what it is, in part because generally the FCC has not been aggressive enough that to, at least in recent decades, to have a real precedence on the subject. It is pretty clear that is not seen as a general license on the part of the FCC to decide these views are in the public interest, these views are against the public interest. Courts have indeed said that this can't be used as kind of a mechanism for censorship. But to what extent could the FCC just say, this is just not the right station or to have, at least in this market. Be more in the public interest if it were run a different way. I think they'd need something a lot more specific than that. But it's true that it is a vague enough phrase that it does risk some degree of kind of viewpoint discrimination and application if the FCC decides to actually try to make something of it.
Could the FCC decide to restore the fairness doctrine, or would they need an act of Congress for that?
No, I think they could restore the fairness doctrine, and then we'd get to the question of whether the Supreme Court would reaffirm it. The reason I say that I think they could is because FCC created it back in the day. It then repealed it in 1987. There was no statute kind of reenacting it, but I don't think there was a statute kind of writing the repeal into law. So I think FCC could try to create it again. I do think at least some justices today would say, the court was wrong in 1969 in Red Line and upholding it, or even it was right that that decision makes no sense in the modern media marketplace, where there's so many other ways. I never thought it made sense.
I don't see how do you. I never thought it made sense because unlike the equal time rule, where at least you can pretty much determine who is a legal candidate and who isn't, when you're talking about requiring a diversity of ideas, you could have like 50 different opinions on any given controversy. And how in the world could that possibly be enforced?
I totally agree with you. I think that was one of the problems with it. First of all, you have to decide what is a controversial enough viewpoint that it requires equal time. Then you have to decide, not equal time, excuse me. That did not require equal time. That required kind of fair presentation of rival views. Then what counts as a rival view? What if somebody who's, let's say, some very anti-gun television station, they broadcast editorials arguing in favor of gun certain kinds of, waiting periods to buy guns. And somebody says, well, you need to cover other views. Oh, sure, we will. We're going to get someone on who will say, no, you should totally ban all guns. Well, we'd probably say, no, that's not quite right. You probably should have someone on the pro-gun side. But then the government has to decide what is a truly rival view, which views of the very many that you could cover do you need to cover. It has this kind of inherent potential vagueness and viewpoint discrimination and application that something like the equal time rule, or another thing, the personal attack rule, which together was part of the fairness doctrine, more or less. It basically said that if somebody is being criticized by name, they in particular have a right to time to respond. Those were at least more precise. They were more narrow. They're less vague, and maybe more justifiable. Or maybe none of it is justifiable. Maybe all of it is. It could very well be that the Supreme Court will have a very different view today than it did back in 1969.
Right. All right. Well, I want to just highlight your blog, The Volokh Conspiracy, which I've been reading for years. And I'm a layman. I wonder, do you have any sense of what percentage of your audience are legal beagles?
We've never done a survey of our readers. And if we did, it wouldn't be scientifically valid in any case because we have a very small response.
Jeff,
some are certainly lawyers. Some are not. But we try to have things that are interesting to both.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Have you ever read it, Greg?
No, I'm sorry, I have not. But I did have a question for the professor that I was like to get a quick answer because I want to respect your time. But I live in Connecticut, and many years ago we had the Sandy Hook school shooting. Alex Jones, who has a private or had a private, I guess, channel on platforms such as YouTube and I think maybe, I'm not sure if beside YouTube, maybe Rumble or but in any event, he made some outlandish remarks about it and was eventually sued by the families.
Right.
And lost. And I believe it was a $1.4 billion award. What failed to protect him in that capacity, seeing he was not on a nationally syndicated but a private platform.
Right. Well, seeing as he was not on over-the-air radio and television broadcast. Mm-hmm. So the answer is on any medium, false statements that damage that particular person's reputation and that are said with some culpable mental state, like maybe knowledge or recklessness, or maybe sometimes negligence, are punishable as defamation, libel, slander. And the court has said that in part because there's a longstanding tradition going back to before the framing, during the framing, after the framing, that recognize that the First Amendment does not, and state constitutional analogs do not preclude defamation law. So what happened in the Alex Jones case is he didn't just say, oh, this was a hoax. That is to say, the shooting never happened. Mm-hmm. He accused particular people, I believe the parents of the murdered children, of essentially being in on the hoax. That's now defamation, because that's saying you are a liar. You are someone who's perpetrating a hoax.
So had he kept it in a more sort of general or generic narrative, he probably could have tiptoed his way over that, but because he got very personal with his allegations, that's what triggered the lawsuit. Right.
And that's why there are a lot of not just conspiracy theories. Some conspiracy theories may be accurate. There are some conspiracies, but there are a lot of conspiracy theories that we have really good reason to believe are false, that just never lead to these lawsuits because they talk about what they are doing, the government is doing, someone is doing. By the way, the same thing applies if it's about a very large group, like Jews, my own group. The Jews are doing this or that. That could be false, but that is not actionable. But if you say Volokh is doing this or that, that becomes actionable. By the way, if you say that about a corporation, even a big corporation, that's also actionable potentially. But if you just talk about it as a very general matter, what they are, or some racial or ethnic group, or the government is doing, then you needn't worry about defamation.
All right. Thank you for that explanation, because I guess I could have researched it on my own, but I was curious to see what your take was on it.
Well, there you go.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Well, you're a fascinating guy. Would love to have you for a longer period of time. I have a lot more questions, but I understand it's St. Patrick's Day.
Talking about the law, that's what I do for a living. That's what I do for fun.
Well, if we ask nicely, maybe we'll get you back again. I would love to talk some more. All right, Eugene, thanks so much, and enjoy St. Patrick's Day. I'm sure you're going to go out and knock back up to you now, right?
You too. All the best.
All right, bye-bye. All right, the great Eugene Volokh.
Yeah. Wow.
I've been admiring him for years, so it's kind of a thrill for me to talk to him tonight.
Yeah, no, I was not familiar with him, but a fascinating guy, and I did read his bio, and wow, he's got more than enough experience to talk about this subject matter.
Absolutely. I wonder, he was at UCLA for 30 years, and now he's at the Hoover Institution. Mm-hmm. I don't know if geographically that means he has moved to Stanford. But anyway, the other thing about him, which is interesting, this shows you what a fan I am of his. I happen to be aware that his dinner parties were sort of like salons that were legendary in Los Angeles, and everybody would clamor to get an invitation. It was just a great combination of food, wine, and conversation, which, you know me, that's like I'm in heaven if I get that. I never received an invitation, but why would I? I'm not famous, and he doesn't know me.
I marvel at the fact that you stay on top of so many of these different, podcasts and online articles and websites, and I'm like, I cannot keep up. It's overwhelming.
It is. But, I stay up on what I'm interested in. There's plenty of stuff that I am a complete idiot about, and I always admit that. But, the stuff I'm interested in, I do deep dives. And,
you do. You do. Yeah, you do your homework.
Yeah. All right, let's go to our favorite segment. Has it happened to Greg? And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, Has It Happened to Greg refers to incidents with the police. We watch videos of stuff that happened recently, semi-recently. We comment on it, and then we ask Greg, has anything like that ever happened to you? Let's see. I think I have 4 videos this week. All right, let's look at some New York City cops being taunted. I want to ask you if you have ever been taunted like this, and also what you think about the way these officers handle it, particularly the officer who is being singled out as the main tauntee, if that's a word.
I'm walking away. Look at his head. Funny shaped head ass nigga. Should smack dog shit out of you.
Do it.
I should smack dog shit out of you. I'm busy, hands full.
Do it. Smack me. Smack me.
Should smack dog shit out of you.
Go hit me. Hit me.
Look at this funny shaped head, nigga. Look at this funny shaped head.
Hit me.
How close you walking up on me?
Hit me. You say gonna smack me. Smack me. Smack me.
I should smack dog shit out of you.
Do it.
Fuck out of here.
Do it.
Go home, bro.
Shut up, nigga. Fuck out of here. Look at your badge.
You see it?
Do it.
Look at him, because if you
my
step on me, that's assault, pussy.
Yo.
Fuck out of here.
Nah, you good, bro.
Watch your mouth, nigga. Watch your mouth.
Go home, bro.
Funny shaped head ass nigga. You can't do shit.
You can't either.
Yes, I can.
So smack me.
I didn't say I would do that. I said I could. I said I could. Pussy, shut up. Fuck out of here. Watch your mouth, nigga. Funny shaped head ass nigga.
First of all, there's nothing wrong with the shape of his head. It's a beautiful shaped head. I would be willing to give 2 of my hats to that officer if he now feels self-conscious about it and to cover up.
You
all right,
should
what do you think?
be proud.
We've seen, like, at demonstrations, it's, not exactly rare for people at demonstrations to be taunting the cops. But I haven't seen it so much like we just saw it in a very isolated situation like that. Have you ever encountered anything like that?
Well, fortunately, no. I guess a variation of it where it was less personal, maybe less confrontational. But we used to have several areas of town in Brantford that were very popular hangouts with. Sort of like the late teen crowd, anywhere from 16 to, 25 or whatever. And it was these spontaneous get-togethers, and it would all usually involve drinking. And we were instructed at roll call to make those areas target areas and disperse any groups before they became really large and really unruly. And oftentimes, I would pull up and say, okay, you're going to have to leave. And you'd get, once in a while, a couple of the bolder individuals would throw the middle finger or say something unkind. And, there were like 30, 40 of them. And it wasn't really much you could do without,
But back then they didn't have the cameras, so you could have gotten away with perhaps a little unprofessional behavior.
Well, I know, but with 39 witnesses as you approach that 40th person, it's not the smartest thing to do. But I talked it over with one of the more senior officers, and he just said, "Do you recognize any of them?" I was like, I know a couple of them definitely by their name. And he's like, okay. He says, well, he goes, put it in your notebook. He said, and he goes, I guarantee within a year or two, he says, you'll have an opportunity, he said, to even the score. And probably 6 months later, Glenn C., we'll call him, came driving up to a gas station that I was taking a complaint on a gas runoff. And he comes driving up. And I noticed he has no windshield wipers on his car.
Oh.
And, I said, I'd like to see your license, registration, and insurance card. And he says, but what are you stopping me for? And I said, well, you're already stopped. I said, at the gas station. I'm not stopping you. I said, but I noticed you have no windshield wipers. And he says, yeah. He goes, but it's daylight. He goes, and it's not raining. And I said, I sort of see a cloud off in the distance. I said, that may or may not rain on us. I said, but regardless, I said, it's a violation not to have them. I said, and be assured.
So his argument was when the weather forecast calls for rain, he installs windshield wipers and then he uninstalls them when it's a sunny day. That was it.
So I said, but I want you to know this has absolutely nothing to do when you were at Parker Park this past summer giving me the finger. I said, this is completely unrelated to that and has nothing to do with it. I said, but now we're going to have to do something about this. And then, of course, he didn't have his license on him. So that was an additional infraction and, on and
You
on.
said he remembered you before you reminded him of that incident?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, who?
I didn't have to. I didn't have to refresh his memory. He knew.
Right. So, what do you think about the way those New York cops handled it?
Well, props to them. They're forced to control their emotion because they're all being recorded not only by the big mouth but on their own body cameras. Most
Is that
likely.
who was it? Was it the guy who was taunting that recorded
Yes.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because he kept holding it over their badges. So yeah, he was definitely the one.
Because it wouldn't have been. Yeah, it wouldn't have been one of the cops because they were on the other side of the camera. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. Let's see what else we have here. Oh, you like these the jewelry robberies?
Oh yeah, smash and grabs.
Yes, this is a smash and grab. I don't know why you light up when there's a smash and grab. Not that you endorse the behavior, but something about this gets your blood flowing. Let's take a look.
Uneventful day at Kumar Jewelers in Fremont until this happened. But if this security footage looks like pure chaos to you, that's not how prosecutors in the Bay Area see it. Authorities say these types of mob-style takeover robberies are meticulously planned, the work of professional thieves who think they've figured out a way to get away with high-stakes crime in a world that's dominated by electronic surveillance. Footage of the June 18, 2025 robbery shows dozens of people rush into Kumar Jewelers on Maury Avenue, wielding backpacks and blunt tools. In about 70 seconds, the thieves cleaned out an estimated 75 to 80% of the store's inventory, worth approximately $1.7 million. Outside, stolen getaway cars were waiting and drove off in different directions, giving each individual driver a better chance of eluding capture. Fremont police say they caught one of the cars on its way out. The others got away. This September 22, 2025 robbery in San Ramon was similar. About 25 people, including 2 gunmen, rushed into Heller's Jewelers, smashing cases and shooting their way out when they discovered the doors had been locked. The group employed a 2-tier escape plan, where stolen getaway cars were driven to predetermined locations. There, legitimately rented vehicles were waiting to take them to safety. But prosecutors say one of the getaway drivers couldn't find his secondary car and was forced to improvise, taking his group to East Oakland while a police drone followed them. Since then, authorities have identified most of the 30 suspected robbers and getaway drivers by tracking down car rentals, reviewing electronic records, and testing DNA, they say. In the Fremont robbery, 4 suspects have been arrested and face federal charges, but prosecutors identified a possible link between the incidents. A suspected getaway driver in San Ramon, Tom Donegan, was also involved in the Fremont robbery, authorities claim.
So I don't know who this guy is that's narrating it, but he refers to these punks as professionals, and maybe in a sense they are, but I don't know. They look like teenagers to me, but on the other hand, they were meticulous, I guess. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, this would be the classic RICO category crime to be able to prosecute them and get very, very lengthy prison terms for them in federal prison. What they, once they identify even just one person, at that point, you have to do a search warrant for their phone records and now figure out who their contacts are. Also, they can geocache the phones from that location on that given date and time.
What does geocache mean?
So they'll be able to subpoena the cell records for the cell towers to see what phones were active in that area at that moment, and that should identify it should identify everyone who was actually carrying a cell phone, and most of them will be carrying cell phones because they want the GPS and they want to be able to communicate with each other. So, but it takes it's manpower intensive to put together a case like that. But at the same time, you are arresting, and prosecuting 30 or 40 individuals in one fell swoop and getting them to roll over on each other. And I mean, that's the way to address these, because once the word gets out that anybody who is involved in that is doing double digits in federal prison, then there's a huge disincentive the next time one of these alerts go out to participate.
Right. So potentially, how could it work out for these kids? Meaning, they're obviously not honest people because they're robbing stores. But if they're going to coordinate the robbery and share in the proceeds, they have to assume the others are going to be honest. I guess there's honor among thieves or whatever.
Never.
But right. But I mean, I guess they must be expecting that to happen to go ahead and do this. But the other thing that I wonder about is how and where might they sell this jewelry?
Well, and that's a great question. I mean, it's the same question that gets posed when there's a high-end art theft, and now all of a sudden you have this very unique contraband, and you're trying to figure out a way of transferring that into cash money.
Right. Art's
They probably have.
Different. I mean, we talked about that with the art heist. Some people may just want to keep the art for themselves. These kids don't look like these kids sure. don't look like the type that are going to sit around and stare at jewelry and So who would buy it? You said it's a great question. Does that mean you don't have a great answer?
No, I mean what they're going to do.
I'll take a mediocre answer.
No, I mean it's going to be a pawn shop or it's going to be a jeweler that is a sketchy jeweler, and he's going to take the jewelry, break out all the stones out of the settings. And melt down the whatever gold or silver was holding them, and then it becomes very difficult to trace at that point.
So I wonder how many sketchy jewelers and pawn shops there are, and how hard it is for the cops to investigate that particular angle.
Yeah, I got involved toward the end of my career in a pawn shop sting operation, and I was shocked at how criminal so many of these pawn shops that looked very respectable from the outside actually were. They would buy almost anything, even when it was obviously stolen. We had undercovers go in with items from Home Depot and Lowe's that were shrink wrapped with, I don't know if you're familiar with this, some of the higher end items have a wire that runs around it almost like a Christmas ribbon would run around a gift. Mm-hmm. And then there's a little sensor that it's connected to. And if you snip any of those wires, it audibly goes off, very loudly in the store, so to discourage anyone from, and of course, if you pass through the cash register without deactivating the sensor, it alerts. Yeah, so, and we actually had undercovers bring them in to pawn shops with, they call it a, what do they call it? It's like something about spider webs, a spider web security or something, because it's wrapped with that wiring, and it's very obvious that it has to be a stolen item. And they would reprimand the undercover and say, "Hey, don't bring it in here like that next time." And they then proceed to smash the audible alert device and cut the wiring off, and then pay a fraction of the money that the item was worth.
Right. Well, I could see what you just described could be used as evidence against the pawn shop owners. But aside from that, are there any laws on the books that require them to somehow examine something and do some due diligence to avoid trafficking in stolen goods?
Well, they're supposed to ask for and get photo identification from the person who is selling it, number one, and then they have to describe in very good detail or take a photograph of the item and keep it in their pawn book. That's reviewable.
That's for everything, or just if it's a certain value or a certain type of merchandise?
Everything.
Really? So if I bring in a radio or something, they're going to have to document all that? Wow,
right.
Okay.
They ask for identification from you. They make a photocopy of the identification, and then they have to write down, Panasonic, AM, FM radio with a cord. And and that way, if there's a burglary or a robbery, the police department can go there and say, "I'd like to see your pawn book for the last week." and see if any of those items were pawned.
Well, even if there's not a robbery, and it's even if it's not a police matter, are there any inspectors? Like, there are health inspectors that can come in and check food.
Well, they're licensed by the towns, at least in Connecticut. I don't know what it's like in other states. Maybe they may have state licenses in other states, but in Connecticut, it is town by town, and it's usually the duty of the police chief to issue the pawn license and renew the pawn license. And so, if they've had a high number of recoveries, they can either suspend the license or forfeit the license. And that's what happened in the case I was involved in. Many of the licenses were revoked because of the fact that they were routinely buying stolen property from our undercovers.
All right. Are you in the mood for a little child endangerment?
Sure.
That may be the first time in the history of the world those words were ever uttered in that order.
Okay.
Are you in the mood for a little child endangerment?
Yeah, I thought it was like a very, very tough question to answer.
I mean, there's no way to verify, but I suspect nobody has ever said those words in that order before. I like to be an original. Let's take a look.
Whoa. Where you going?
DJ Webb shared this video he took at noon on Monday at the Town Center Mall parking lot in Kennesaw. He'd spotted a 2-year-old child barefoot walking through the parking lot alone.
Lil' mama, where you going? You can't walk in the street. Go get back in the car. Get back in the car. Wait on your parents to come back.
Webb says he was afraid she'd get hit by a car and wanted to help.
Trying to grab her and keep her from running out. At that point, I said, okay, let me go get her brothers or whoever that is in the car. So I knocked on the window.
Cop police tell us her brothers, ages 5 and 7, were in the car alone.
Police said they was watching YouTube videos on her iPads. Yeah. So they had no idea she'd gotten out of the car.
On the video, you see her 7-year-old brother get out to get her.
Maybe make her sit up in the front with y'all until your parents come back.
Okay. I'm babysitting someone.
Huh?
I'm babysitting someone.
You babysitting? He said it with pride too, so he was being a big brother. He said, I'm babysitting her.
Then Webb called 911.
Kudos to Cobb Police Department that showed up.
The mom eventually came out with another older child. She was arrested and charged with 3 counts of reckless conduct. Police tell me the children then stayed at the precinct eating pizza until another relative could pick them up. Meanwhile, Webb posted his videos online where tens of thousands have watched them, shared them, and made their comments.
Some of the comments, why'd you call the police? Why'd you call the police? And my response to those people and to the mom, I had no choice because I had no idea who was going to be there for the kids.
Other comments were kinder.
A whole lot of thank yous, and I thank you guys for thanking me.
Looking back, Webb tells me he's not sure why he was even at this parking lot that day, since there is another mall much closer to him.
But I came here, and I don't know why. I think I know why now.
Maybe God put you in the right place?
I believe God brought me here.
Well,
I think the babysitter should have been arrested. Those little 5 and 7-year-old brats for not doing a good job.
I suspect that his jewelry is not for show, but he wears his faith right on his chest.
It sounds that way. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So obviously it looks bad when you see a 2-year-old wandering around the parking lot like that, and I wouldn't say it's admirable parenting for sure.
No, he absolutely did the right thing by calling 911. I mean,
that's not my question. That's not my question. I mean, I don't think it was good parenting. This is a preface, but kids are sometimes left in cars by themselves, aren't they? And is it generally considered automatically a crime to do that?
Jeff, I think you have to factor in the age. I mean, if you're talking a teenager,
right.
Yeah, I think that should be about the cutoff. Should be about age 13 and above. But no, that's just reckless. It
is. I agree.
It's endangerment. It's endangerment of the child that's in your care and custody. To leave them to their own devices in a car, because let's face it. I mean, somebody can abduct them, quite easily, and that's another danger that no one even thinks about.
All right. And if you had been the officer who responded to that call, you would have made the arrest too, you think?
Oh yeah, 100%.
All right. Well, you're a good guy.
Yeah. Well,
me, not so much. But
some of the cases are a little more black and white than others. That one is pretty black and white.
All right. All right. Let's just say I was asking a devil's advocate question. I don't want everybody to hate me now. All right. This last one does not involve the police. It involves security guards. But I have a question about the law.
Look like swinging.
Let's go. Let's go.
What?
Let's go.
Got on.
All right. Let's go. Hey, I'll put your ass in here. Let's go.
Oh, gay, you dragging him, bro. Oh, my.
All right, God bless you too.
They really dragging his ass, boy. Boy, they gave it what they Subway Surfers on photo.
All right, we don't need to see the rest of it. So, is it legal to drag somebody out like that?
I would suspect not. I mean, they should have called, actual law enforcement and had them criminally trespassed. And
see, I've heard that said before, and I don't really know what the law is. I wish the professor was still here; he might know. But it should be allowed, because the problem with what you just said is that the police may not show up for hours or may not show up at all. And if that's the requirement, then you're essentially saying you have to let this trespasser just stay there indefinitely. That's maybe it is the law, maybe it is, but you know what I'm saying? That doesn't sound right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it of course, and it will vary from state to state, but I mean, the security officers have limited authority. Let's put it that way. They certainly don't have the same authority that police officers have. But I just think they're on much safer ground calling law enforcement and confiscating the skateboard, I guess. I imagine they could have held him until they arrived. But you're right, though. If they make a low priority call and they get there an hour later, I don't know what they're supposed to do for that hour.
Right. And it could be way more than an hour. It could be. You know. I mean, you worked in upstanding communities where they could hire enough police officers, and they probably responded fairly promptly. But in other parts of the country,
Yeah,
I'm really curious about that. I've read these stories about landlords having problems with squatters. They can't get rid of the squatters. And I don't know if this, I may be comparing apples and oranges, because it may not be a case where the landlord feels physically strong enough and safe enough to drag them out. But, that would be a similar question, I think. Does the landlord have the authority to drag them out? Instead, they make the landlord go through the court system.
The eviction process, and then the sheriff will show up and remove their property. Which is expensive and time consuming. I mean, that's why, so many people are reluctant to become landlords, because the law doesn't favor them.
Now, they have these stand your ground laws, which is different because that's more of an issue of imminence. You don't have somebody who's been squatting. There's somebody right there at the moment who you perceive as a threat. So, if you can sometimes shoot them, I guess you could probably sometimes drag them out, right?
I would think. Yeah.
I'm not a professional like you, but I would guess shooting is worse than dragging, right?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Yes.
Usually the consequences are better. All right. Well, thanks, Greg. You edified me and the audience tonight, and we appreciate it. And I would like to make the audience aware of your book. It's a fabulous, would you call it a memoir, or is a memoir more when it's your whole life?
Well, it covers my whole life, but it really focuses on the federal lawsuit and the issues of, being a whistleblower.
Well, I know what it focuses on. I read it.
Yes, but I'm saying,
but I'm asking, is it accurate to call it a memoir? I'm asking, what's a memour, I guess.
Well, you can say autobiography, you can say memoir, you can just say a nonfiction account of the experience of a whistleblower. I think any of them would be appropriate.
All right. Well, I'm going to call it a memoir then. What do you make of them apples?
That's your call.
All right. Well, let's see. What else? Before we say goodbye, how about if I ask you nice people to join us tomorrow night for Ask the Inspector with Scott Ritter at 7 p.m. That's Eastern time. In other time zones, it's not 7 p.m. It's a completely different time. And on Thursday night on The Whiners, our guest will be Daniel Davis, who's a 4-time combat veteran and host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive, a big hit podcast on YouTube and elsewhere. Thanks to our beloved audience. Thanks to you, Greg. Any plans for St. Patrick's Day? I see you dressed for the occasion. So did I, sort of.
Yeah, no, I think I'll be staying in tonight and being a good boy.
All right. It's probably not as bad as New Year's Eve, but not the safest night to drink.
Correct.
Not that our Irish friends have ever been known to drink to excess, and not that our non-Irish friends are known to party on St. Patrick's Day.
You're reminding me, Jeff. I'm going to, when we leave the show, I'm going to send you a short video that pertains to St. Patrick's Day.
All right. I will look forward to that.
Okay.
Unless I'm just too stinking drunk to pay attention to it, in which case I'll forget all about it. All right. Thanks a lot, Greg. Thanks a lot, everybody, for watching. Good night, everybody.